They told her to run, but the mafia boss said, "Let them come. I dare them." She called herself Sarah. Sarah was a good name. Simple, forgettable. It tasted like dust in her mouth, but it was safe. Here, in the damp, gray lung of the city. Sarah worked the afternoon shift at the Mariner Hotel. The Mariner was a place of quiet desperation, smelling of industrial bleach and the ghosts of cigarettes smoked indoors 20 years ago. It suited her. She was a ghost herself. Isabel, the name she buried deep, the name that belonged to the woman who used to laugh, was gone. In her place was Sarah, a woman who flinched when the service elevator doors hissed open, a woman who laundered sheets and scrubbed toilets with her head down, her gaze perpetually fixed on the nearest exit. She was isolated by choice, paranoid by necessity. The other maids, tired women with aching feet and loud laughs, eventually stopped trying to include her in their break-room gossip. She was too quiet, too brittle. She looked as one of them had whispered to another, like she'd seen hell. She had. And she knew it could find her again. She kept her life in a single duffel bag under a loose floorboard in her rented room, 2 blocks away. She owned 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, and 1 pair of broken-in sneakers. She had $94 in cash and a burner phone that held only 1 number. Her existence was a holding pattern, a panicked breath held for 6 solid months. On a Tuesday, the rain came down in cold to angry sheets. The hotel was slow. By 6 o'clock, the sky was a deep, bruised purple, and the alley behind the kitchen was filling with puddles. It was her turn to take out the trash. She hated the alley. It was a narrow canyon of brick and dumpsters, the flickering security light at the far end casting more shadows than it revealed. She pushed the heavy metal door open with her hip, dragging the overstuffed black bags. The smell of wet garbage and stale beer hit her. She took 3 steps toward the dumpster when she heard it, a low, desperate plea. "I got it. I swear, I can get the rest." "You can't." A second voice, cold, flat. Isabel froze. She squeezed herself into the shallow alcove of the kitchen doorway, hidden by the shadow of the open door. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. "Don't look, walk away, go back inside." But she was trapped. They were 10 feet away. "Please, Vinny, just tell him I need 1 more week." The first voice was high, cracking with terror. "He doesn't give weeks." She risked a look. 2 men, immaculate in dark suits that the rain beaded on, stood over a third man who was on his knees. The kneeling man was clutching a silver briefcase. One of the standing men, broad-shouldered and tall, kicked the briefcase away. It skidded across the wet pavement and slammed into the wall near Isabel. Flipping open, stacks of money, bound in plastic, spilled out. The kneeling man sobbed. The broad-shouldered man sighed, an impatient sound. He looked at his partner, a smaller, leaner man with restless eyes. "Handle it." The lean man smiled. He pulled something from his coat. It was not a gun. It was a wire, thin and cruel, stretched between 2 wooden handles. He stepped behind the kneeling man. Isabel squeezed her eyes shut. She pressed her palms into the brick, the rough surface biting into her skin. She heard a wet, choked gurgle. A desperate kicking of heels against the pavement, then a heavy, final thud. Silence. The rain hammered the pavement. Her breath hitched, a tiny, terrified sound, loud as a scream in the sudden quiet. The 2 men hadn't moved. "What was that?" the lean man whispered. "The door," the broad-shouldered one said. Isabel's blood turned to ice. She saw the lean man's head turn, his restless eyes scanning the darkness. They passed over her, then snapped back. He peered into the alcove, his gaze locking directly with hers. He saw her. He saw her face. He saw her terror. He saw the faded Mariner Hotel logo on her polo shirt. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stared, and he stared back. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. The broad-shouldered man grabbed the briefcase, stuffing the money back in. "Let's go. Clean this up later." "In a second," the lean man said, his eyes still locked on Isabel. He took 1 step toward her. That broke the spell. Isabel lunged backward, slamming the heavy steel door shut. The clang echoed in the alley. She fumbled with the deadbolt, her fingers numb and stupid, and rammed it home. She didn't wait. She didn't go to the front desk. She didn't grab her jacket or her purse. She ran through the kitchen, ignoring the startled shout of the cook. She burst through the lobby, past the confused night manager, and out the glass front doors into the pouring rain. She ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her vision spotted. She ducked into the anonymity of the subway, her clothes plastered to her skin, her hair dripping cold water down her back. She huddled on the wet plastic seat, shaking so violently her teeth rattled. He saw my face. He saw my shirt. She got off 3 stops later and huddled under the awning of a closed bodega. Her burner phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Maria, the head of housekeeping. Isabel stared at the screen, her thumb hovering. She finally answered, "Sarah, my God, where are you?" Maria's voice was a panicked whisper. "You bolted out of here, or what happened?" I had to leave. I'm sick." The lie was thin, pathetic. "Listen to me," Maria said, her voice dropping lower. 2 men. They just came in. Big men. In expensive suits. They asked the night manager for the girl who just ran out. They said she dropped her wallet. But their eyes, Sarah, they were not nice. I told them you went home hours ago, that your shift ended at 4. I don't think they believed me." Isabel's stomach dissolved. "Maria." "Do not come back here," Maria hissed. "And do not go to your apartment. You understand me? Get out now." The line clicked dead. "They're already looking." She was out of time. She had no money save the crumpled bills in her pocket, no jacket, no plan. She started walking again, faster this time, paranoia gripping her throat. Every car that slowed, every pair of headlights that swept over her, was them. She walked for what felt like hours, the adrenaline fading into a deep, bone-soaked chill. She was in a part of town she didn't recognize. The buildings were taller, the stone older. Here, the rain slicked off imported marble and glinted on the polished brass of exclusive addresses. She felt a presence. It was the same instinct that had kept her alive for 6 months. A prickle on her neck. She glanced over her shoulder. A man, a block behind her, walking at her pace. He wore a dark coat, his head down, but he was matching her stride for stride. She turned right, her sneakers squelching. He turned right, she crossed the street, dodging a taxi. He crossed the street. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her system. She started to jog. He started to jog. She was being tailed. She broke into a dead sprint. She rounded a corner, her feet sliding on the slick pavement. It was a narrower street, lined with black town cars. Halfway down, a steel door was set into a brick facade, marked only by a small, discreet carving of a lion's head. She heard his footsteps, heavier now, closing the distance. In desperation, she grabbed the brass ring of the lion's mouth and pulled. The door opened. She didn't expect it to. She stumbled forward, falling out of the cold, wet night and into a different world. It wasn't a kitchen. It was heat. It was velvet. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and old whiskey, underpinned by a low, rhythmic bass that vibrated in her bones. She was in a hallway, carpeted in deep burgundy, soft. Golden light came from sconces on the walls, a few yards down. The hallway opened into a vast, crowded room, a high-end club. Women in glittering dresses and men in sharp suits held low-stemmed glasses, their voices a confident murmur. Isabel stood there, dripping, gasping in her cheap, stained uniform. A dozen faces turned. They looked at her with confusion, then disgust. "Hey!" She spun around. The man who had been chasing her was in the hallway. He was big, burly, and his face was grim. He lunged, grabbing her by the upper arm, his fingers dug in like steel claws. "Who let you in?" he snarled, dragging her back toward the steel door. "No!" Isabel cried, panic lending her strength. She twisted, clawing at his hand. "Let me go!" She was cornered. She had run from the alley into a gilded cage, and the wolf was at the door. "That's enough." The voice was not loud. It was calm. It was deep, and it cut through the music, the panic, and the rain. The man holding her arm froze. Isabel looked past him. A man stood at the entrance to the main room. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so perfectly tailored it looked more like armor. His hair was dark, his face a study of harsh angles and shadows. He wasn't looking at the man holding her. He was looking at Isabel. His eyes were the darkest brown she had ever seen, and they held an impossible, lethal stillness. "She doesn't belong here, boss," the man holding her said. His voice suddenly strained. The man, the boss, took one slow step into the hallway. He didn't look at his man's face. He looked at the white-knuckled grip on Isabel's arm. He looked at the new, raw bruises forming over the old, faded yellow ones on her skin. He looked at the sheer, animal terror in her eyes. And he did not walk away. "I said," he repeated, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more dangerous than a shout. "That's enough, Gino." Gino dropped her arm as if he'd been burned. He stepped back, his head bowing. She came in off the street." The boss ignored him. His gaze remained on Isabel. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps, backed against the velvet wallpaper. He took another step. She flinched. He stopped. "You're bleeding," he said. She looked down. Her hand, where she'd slammed it against the alley brick, was scraped raw. Blood dripped onto the expensive carpet. "Take her upstairs," he said. Not to her, but over his shoulder. Another man, built like a refrigerator, stepped forward. "Boss, we don't know her. It's not safe." The boss finally turned his head. A slow, deliberate movement. "Nico, take her to the suite. Get her water and food now." The command was absolute. Nico nodded, his face tight, and gestured for Isabel to walk. She was trapped between two monsters, and she had to choose. She looked at Gino, who was rubbing his hands, angry. She looked at Nico, who looked at her like she was garbage. And she looked at the boss, who was watching her with a quiet, unreadable intensity. She walked toward the boss. He turned and led the way, parting the crowd without touching anyone. They simply moved. He led her up a private staircase, through a locked door, and into a sprawling upstairs suite. It was silent up here. Dark wood, leather sofas, a fireplace, and a massive window overlooking the city lights. Nico followed them in. "Wait here." He left, locking the door behind him. She was alone with him. He walked to a bar in the corner and poured a glass of water, the sound of the liquid hitting the glass deafeningly loud. He turned and held it out to her. Isabel stared at his hand, a strong hand, clean, unmarked. She flinched as he moved closer. He stopped, his patience seemingly infinite. He placed the glass on a low wooden table between them. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't believe him, but she also knew the man in the alley would. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice still quiet, grounding. "Sarah," she whispered, the lie automatic. He watched her for a long moment. He knew she was lying. He didn't call her on it. "Who are you running from? Sarah?" She shook her head, wrapping her arms around her own waist. "I can't. You have to let me go. They're looking for me." "Who? I can't." He walked to the window, looking down at the city. "You're safe here. For tonight." Nico returned, carrying a tray with a sandwich, a bowl of soup, and a first aid kit. He placed it on the table and looked at his boss. "Anything else? Get her a change of clothes, something warm, and wait outside." Nico left, his disapproval a physical force in the room. The boss gestured to the food. "Eat." Isabel stared at the soup. She hadn't eaten since morning. She was starving, but her stomach was in knots. She picked up the sandwich, her hands shaking. "There's a bathroom through there," he said, nodding to a door. "Shower, warm up." He sat in a leather armchair across the room, giving her space. He didn't push. He didn't demand answers. He just watched. She ate the sandwich in 3 bites, like an animal. She drank the soup. The warmth spread through her, fighting the chill. He was right. She was safe, at least for this minute. But safety was an illusion. She must have drifted off, sitting upright on the sofa, exhausted beyond measure. Because when she woke, the room was dark, save for the blue glow of the city outside the window. And she was screaming. It was a silent scream, lodged in her throat. The dream was choking her. The lean man's smiling face, the wet gurgle, the alley, the rain. She gasped, sitting bolt upright, her heart trying to escape her chest. She was hyperventilating, the panic attack rising like a black tide. You're all right." She spun her head. He was still there. He hadn't moved from the chair. It was late. Must have been 3 or 4 in the morning. He hadn't slept. He was sitting in the dark, watching the door. On his lap, resting on his thigh, was a black pistol. He held it loosely, his hand resting on the grip as if it were an extension of his own body. He wasn't a club owner. Not just a club owner. He was a guardian, a jailer, a king. He wasn't trying to comfort her. He wasn't asking what she dreamed about. He was simply stating a fact. She was in that moment. All right. Her breathing hitched, slowed. The presence of the gun, which should have terrified her, was strangely calming. It was an answer. They'll find me, she whispered. The first true thing she'd said. They'll come here. Luca, a name she did not yet know, looked away from her, toward the shadows gathering at the locked door. His voice was flat, a promise of violence. They'll come, he agreed. Let them. It wasn't an offer of protection. It was a challenge. He wasn't hiding her. He was using her as bait. The realization should have sent her running again, but she was too cold, too tired. And the man in the chair, with the gun on his lap and death in his eyes, was the first thing that had felt solid in 6 months. The adrenaline fled, leaving an exhaustion so deep it was a physical weight. Her eyes grew heavy. She curled onto her side on the plush sofa, pulling her damp legs up. She fell asleep again, not to the sound of her own fear, but to the sound of his quiet, steady breathing in the dark. Luca stayed awake, watching the shadows, and waited for the ward to knock on his door. She woke to the sound of silence. The gray morning light of the city pressed against the suite's massive window. The man was gone. The gun was gone. The only trace of him was the scent of expensive coffee and something sharp, like cypress and steel, lingering in the air. On the leather sofa, folded neatly, was a set of clothes: black yoga pants, a soft gray hoodie, and new sneakers. The clothes Nico had been sent to fetch: a gift, a uniform, a cage. Her panic returned, colder this time, heavier. Last night, she'd been exhausted, running on pure animal fear. This morning, her mind was sharp. The man who had sat in that chair, the man who had invited war, was not a protector. He was a predator of a different species. She had traded a pack of wolves for a lion. She stood, her muscles aching from the sprint, from the tension, from the hard floor of the alley. She looked at the door. He had locked her in. She tried the handle. It was open. A test. He had left the door unlocked. He was waiting to see what she would do. Isabel didn't hesitate. She left the clothes. She was still in her damp, stained mariner uniform. She slipped her feet into her ruined sneakers. She didn't look back. She moved silently down the private staircase. The main club below was dark, smelling of stale booze and the floor polish of the morning cleaning crew. She saw no one. She found the steel door with the lion's head, eased the heavy bar back, and slipped out into the alley. The air was cool and damp. Freedom. She walked, fast, trying to blend with the morning commuters. She kept her head down, her heart hammering. The subway. If she could just get to the subway, she could disappear again. She was good at disappearing. She was half a block from the station, the green glow of the entrance calling to her, when a hand clamped down on her arm. Going somewhere? It wasn't Gino. It was a different man. Short, thick, with a flat nose. He smelled like cheap cigarettes. He grabbed her other arm, his grip bruising. "You've been a hard girl to find." "Let me go," she screamed, twisting, kicking back. "Mr. Varelli wants to see you." The name hit her like a physical blow. Varelli, the name the kneeling man had sobbed. He started dragging her toward a beat-up sedan parked at the curb. This was it. This was the end. She was going to die in a trunk, a black Mercedes sedan. Sleek and silent, turned the corner and screeched to a halt, blocking the sedan. Nico got out of the passenger side. He didn't hurry. He just walked toward the man holding Isabel. "She's with us," Nico said. His voice was flat. The flat-nosed man sneered. "She's Varelli property! Piss off!" Nico sighed. He moved so fast Isabel almost missed it. He struck the man once in the throat, a hard, precise chop. The man's hands flew from Isabel to his own neck. his eyes wide, making a wet, gasping sound. Nico grabbed the man's head and slammed it hard into the roof of the sedan. The man crumpled to the pavement. A second man jumped from the sedan's driver's side, pulling a pistol. Before he could raise it, another of Luca's men, one she hadn't seen, stepped from the alley, pressed a gun to the back of the man's head, and whispered something. The man dropped his weapon. Nico grabbed Isabel's arm. His grip was just as hard as the other man's. "The boss wants to see you." He didn't drag her. He propelled her. They shoved her into the back of the Mercedes. The doors locked with a heavy, final thunk. 10 minutes. She'd been free for 10 minutes. They took her back to the club, back up the stairs, and into the suite. Luca was there, standing by the window, drinking coffee. He hadn't been testing her. He had been watching her. "Sit," he said. She didn't. She stood by the door, vibrating with terror and rage. "You let them find me." "I let you run," he corrected. His voice dangerously quiet. He set his cup down. "You made it 4 blocks. They were waiting at the subway. They were waiting at the bus station. They were canvassing your apartment, which they found an hour after you left the hotel. Where were you going to go?" "Sarah?" The fake name felt stupid in his mouth. "You're out of options," he said, walking toward her. "I am the only one you have, so you're going to tell me the truth, the real truth, starting with your name." She stared at him, her jaw locked. "Your name, Isabel," she whispered. The name felt strange, rusty. "Isabel," he repeated. It sounded different in his voice, possessive. "Now, who are they?" "I told you. They said Varelli. The Varelli Syndicate. I know who they are. They are rivals. What did they do? Why are they hunting a hotel maid?" The dam broke. The words spilled out, disorganized, frantic. "The alley behind the hotel. I was taking out the trash. 2 men. They were executing him. A man on his knees. They used a wire. He was begging. He called one of them Vinny." Luca's face remained impassive, but his eyes sharpened. "There was a briefcase. Money. It spilled. The killer. The lean one. He looked right at me. He saw my face. He saw my uniform. I ran. Maria, my coworker, she called. She said they were already there, asking for me." Luca nodded slowly. "The Varelli crew. The short one you just met. That was Benny. The rat. The man he works for. The lean one you saw is Marco Trevino, a sadist who enjoys his work. The man he was with was his brother, Vinny." He knew them. He knew their names. "They won't stop," Isabel whispered, the reality crushing her. "They'll never stop." "No," Luca agreed. "They won't." She looked at him, her eyes begging. "Please, you have to let me go. I'll disappear. I'll go north to Canada. They'll never find me. I just told you. They found you in 4 blocks. You think you can make it to Canada?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You run. You're dead by midnight. You stay with me. You might live." "Stay with you? As what? A prisoner?" "As my guest," he said. "They want to kill you because you're a witness. They're a rival of mine. Your problem is now my problem." He wasn't telling her to run. He was telling her to stay. He moved her that afternoon, not to a hotel, but to a penthouse apartment in a glittering high-rise that he owned. It was sterile, all glass and white leather. But the windows were reinforced, and Nico stood guard outside the only elevator-accessible door. She was overwhelmed. She was terrified. She was a ghost in a gilded cage, but she had no other option. Days bled into a week. Luca was rarely there, but the place was his. His suits hung in one of the closets. His whiskey lined the bar. She existed in his space, breathing his air, when he was there. She watched him. She hid in the margins of his life, observing the man who had claimed her. She saw him run his empire. It was dangerous. She heard the clipped, cold commands he gave over the phone, conversations about shipments, territories, and consequences. He was violent, she knew that, the city knew it, but he was also principled. She saw him with Nico, who had gone from treating her like trash to treating her like a fragile, dangerous package. He spoke to Luca with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. Luca, in turn, listened to him, valued his counsel. He respected his people. One afternoon, a young woman was brought up. She was a hostess from the club, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She spoke to Luca in a low, trembling voice. A high roller, a man with political connections, had cornered her, hurt her. She was terrified. Isabel watched Luca listen. His face didn't change, but a cold stillness settled in the room. He didn't judge the girl. He didn't ask her what she'd done to provoke it. He just listened. When she was finished, he made one phone call. His voice was silk. "You're done in my city," he said to the person on the other end. "Touch one of my people again, and I will burn your house to the ground with you in it." He hung up. He assured the girl she would never be bothered again and had Nico arrange for her medical care and a paid vacation. He kept his word. He was a monster, but he protected his own. One night, 2 weeks after she'd been moved, a storm broke over the city. It wasn't gentle rain, it was a violent assault of thunder and lightning, the wind howling against the penthouse glass. Isabel sat on the sofa, watching the sky crack open. The first clap of thunder was sharp, explosive. It sounded like a gunshot. The second was a low, rolling boom. It sounded like a body hitting wet pavement. Her breathing hitched. The walls of the penthouse, which had felt so vast, suddenly compressed. The air was too thin. The alley, the lean man's smile, the gurgle. She scrambled off the sofa, her hands over her ears. It was too loud. She needed it to be quiet. She needed a small space. She fled to the master bedroom, to the walk-in closet. It was dark, filled with the scent of his clothes, cypress and steel. She huddled in the far corner, between hanging suits and stacked shoeboxes, pulling her knees to her chest. She buried her face, trying to block out the sound of the storm, the sound of the murder. She didn't hear him arrive. She didn't hear the apartment door open. She only knew he was there when the closet door slid open, spilling soft bedroom light into her sanctuary. She flinched, a small, wounded animal sound escaping her throat. Luca stood in the doorway. He didn't move. He just looked at her, curled up on the floor, shaking apart. She expected annoyance, anger, judgment, and he gave her none of it. When he didn't try to pull her out, he didn't lecture her. He unbuttoned the cuffs of his white shirt and rolled them up his forearms. He loosened his tie. Then he crouched down, his movements slow, and sat on the floor across from her. He sat in the dark, in the closet, surrounded by his expensive shoes, and he just sat. He didn't speak. He just breathed, a slow, steady inhale, a long, controlled exhale. Isabel's breathing was frantic, high in her chest, but his was a rhythm. Inhale, exhale, an anchor in the storm. She watched him, her vision blurry with tears. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the wall, giving her the dignity of her breakdown. Subconsciously, her lungs tried to match him. Her frantic gasps began to slow. The knot in her chest loosened. Just a fraction. The thunder cracked again, and she jumped, but his steady breathing didn't falter. After a long time, when her shaking had subsided to a fine tremor, his voice came low and rough. "You're safe, Isabel." "I'm not," she whispered, the words raw. "I'm never safe. I thought I was safe once before. After I left, before this, I trusted someone. My partner." The confession spilled out, quiet in the enclosed space. I told him everything. He said he would protect me, and then he sold me. He sold my location to the people I was running from, for $5,000. That's what I was worth. She finally looked at him. "How do I know you're not him?" Luca's face hardened. The muscle in his jaw jumped. He leaned his head back against the wall, the shadow swallowing his eyes. The word betrayal hung in the air, thick and poisoned. "When I was 15, he said, his voice a low rumble. "My mother went to meet a friend for lunch. She never came home." Isabel watched him, holding her breath. "It was a rival, the Grimaldis. They wanted to send my father a message. They took her, but they shouldn't have been able to. She was guarded. She was careful." He paused. There was a betrayal. "My father's consigliere, the man who taught me how to tie a tie. He sold her location. He told the Grimaldis which restaurant she'd be at, and he pulled her security detail at the last minute for a separate emergency." His voice, usually so controlled, was shaking, only slightly, but it was there. It was the most human sound she had ever heard him make. They found her 2 days later. I identified the body, he said. I never forgive betrayal. It's the one sin I won't tolerate. Not from my men, not from my enemies, and not from myself. He turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The man was gone. The boss was gone. In his place was the 15-year-old boy, raw and full of rage. I am not him, he said. The storm outside seemed to fade. The tension in the small closet was electric. It was the shared trauma, the proximity, the raw, bleeding wounds they had just shown each other. He didn't move from his spot, but his gaze dropped. It fell from her eyes, to her cheek, and settled on her mouth. She wasn't breathing. He leaned forward slowly. It wasn't a lunge, it was an offering. He gave her seconds to pull away, an eternity. She didn't. His lips met hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was slow, yes, but intense. It was loaded with restrained hunger, with weeks of tension, with the ghosts in the closet. His mouth was firm, warm, and tasted of whiskey and absolute control. It was a kiss that asked questions and made demands. It was the first time she'd been touched with purpose, not violence, in years. A small, trembling sigh escaped her. Her lips parted, and she kissed him back. Her hands, uncertain, came up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart beating, a steady, powerful rhythm beneath her palms. He deepened the kiss, one of his hands coming up, not to her face, but to the wall beside her head, trapping her. He angled his head, his mouth moving over hers with a possessive heat that stole her breath. It was too much, the intimacy, the confession, the sheer power of him. Her past collided with her present. She stiffened, her hands balling into fists against his shirt. The second she resisted, he stopped. He didn't pull away. He just stopped, his mouth hovering an inch from hers. He rested his forehead against hers, his breathing hot and uneven. He hadn't pushed. He hadn't demanded more. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Her lips were swollen, her eyes wide and scared. "When you're ready," he whispered. The promise hung in the air, heavier than any threat. He stood, his knees popping slightly. He offered her a hand. She took it, and he pulled her easily to her feet. The moment was over. He was all business again, the armor sliding back into place. He walked out of the closet and picked up his phone from the nightstand. He dialed. Isabel watched him, her hand still tingling from his. "Nico," he said, his voice pure steel. "Get me the team. I want the Varelli hit squad, the ones from the alley. Find Vinny. Find Marco Trevino. I want to know where they sleep." He paused. "It's time to take out the trash." The war he had invited did not knock. It exploded. It happened 3 nights after their encounter in the closet. Luca was at the club, in a late meeting with his capos. Isabel was in the penthouse, restless, pacing the glass walls. She had taken to watching his car, the black Mercedes, when it was parked on the street below. She could see the top of it from the 32nd floor. She was watching it when it vanished in a flash of white-hot light. The sound came a second later, a deep, guttural whoomph that rattled the reinforced windows of the penthouse. The shockwave vibrated through the soles of her feet. Isabel screamed. Her mind went white with a singular, blinding thought. He's gone. She didn't remember grabbing the key card. She didn't remember the elevator. She was in the lobby, shoving past the doorman, her feet bare on the marble. Nico, his face a mask of grim fury, grabbed her before she could hit the street. "You stay inside," he yelled, pushing her back. The car, it," she gasped, pointing at the inferno on the curb. "It's not his car," Nico said, his eyes scanning the street. "It's a decoy. He's still inside. They were watching. They've been watching." The blast had been meant for Luca as he left the club, not while he was in it. They had gotten the timing wrong, or their intel was bad. When Luca finally came up to the penthouse an hour later, he was untouched, but his face was carved from granite. He was flanked by 2 bodyguards she'd never seen before, and his black suit smelled faintly of smoke and chemicals. Isabel was huddled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, shaking. The moment he saw her, His focus narrowed. He dismissed the guards and walked to her. "They missed," he said. "It was for you," she whispered, her voice hollow. "This is because of me. I brought this to you." "This was coming," he said, his voice flat. "You were just the match. I should go." The words tasted like ash. "I should run before they kill me?" He crouched in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. His dark eyes were burning. "They have tried before. They will try again. You running changes nothing. It only gets you killed. I'm putting you in danger," she cried, the tears she'd held back finally breaking free. "I'm the witness. I'm the target." "You are," he agreed, his voice softening just a fraction. "But you're not the target anymore. You're the reason. They tried to kill a witness on my territory. Now they're trying to kill me. They declared war, Isabel. Not you." He cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away the tears. "You don't get to feel guilty for this. This is my world. You just live in it now." He left her then, disappearing into his office to make the calls she could hear but not understand. Voices were raised. Retaliation was being planned. That night, Isabel's resolve broke. She went to her own sterile guest room and stared at the perfectly made bed. She couldn't be alone. The sound of the explosion was still ringing in her ears. She crept into the master bedroom. It was empty. He was still in his office. The room was dark, smelling of him, that sharp, clean scent of cypress, expensive soap, and the faint metallic smell of the gun oil he used. She slid under the covers of his bed, a king-sized fortress. The sheets were cool, the thread count impossibly high. She curled onto her side, her face buried in his pillow, and inhaled. It was the first time her heart had stopped racing since the explosion. She was wrapped in his scent, in his space. Here, she was safe. She fell asleep. She woke hours later when the mattress dipped beside her. Her eyes flew open. Luca was there. He had stripped down to his boxers, his body a map of lean muscle and old, faded scars in the moonlight. His pistol was on the nightstand. He slid under the covers and lay on his back, his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. Neither of them spoke. She was a rigid line of tension, her back to him. He was a furnace of heat, 6 inches away. "You're shaking," he said to the ceiling. "I'm cold." He didn't move for a long moment, then a heavy sigh. "Come here." It wasn't a request. She hesitated, then rolled over, her body stiff. He turned onto his side, facing her. He opened one arm. She moved into the space, into his heat. His arm came around her, pulling her back against his chest, her head tucked perfectly under his chin. His body was a solid wall behind her. His breathing was slow, steady. She stopped shaking. She started sleeping in his bed. It became their ritual. He would come in late, long after she had fallen asleep, wrapped around his pillow, and slide in behind her. He would pull her back against him, his arm a heavy, possessive bar over her waist. There was nothing sexual about it. It was about possession. It was about comfort. It was two broken, wary people finding an anchor in the dark. Until the night the tension finally snapped. It had been a hard week. Luca was on edge. The war with the Varellis was escalating. A shipment burned. A warehouse hit. He came home smelling of cordite and rage. He found her asleep in his bed, as always. He showered, washing the day off him, and slid in, pulling her against him. But this time, she was awake. She turned in his arms to face him, in the dark. They just looked at each other. His eyes were shadowed, his face exhausted. Her hair was a wild halo on his pillow. "You should sleep," she whispered. "I can't," he rasped. His gaze dropped to her mouth. The air in the room became thick, charged. The weeks of shared space, of unspoken confessions, of the kiss in the closet, all coalesced into a single, unbearable point. Isabel. He breathed her name. It was a warning. She didn't care. She was tired of being afraid. She leaned in and pressed her lips to his. It was slow at first, a question, a sigh. He met her kiss, his mouth firm, controlled. But then her hand came up, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. She pressed closer. A low groan rumbled in his chest. Control shattered. He rolled, moving with a speed that stole her breath, pinning her beneath him. His weight was a comfort, not a threat. His mouth became desperate, hungry. This wasn't the restrained kiss from the closet. This was raw, pent up, and full of the week's violence and fear. His lips crushed hers, his stubble scraping her skin, and she arched up into him, meeting his desperation with her own. Her hands were in his hair, pulling him closer, as if she could absorb him. He kissed her jaw, her throat, his mouth finding the pulse that hammered there. "Luca," she gasped, her body on fire. His hand moved, not to her breasts, but to her side. He slid his palm up her ribs, his touch reverent, and his fingers brushed the scar. It was an old one, a thin, white line on her ribs from a knife, from the man who had sold her out. She flinched, her breath catching, the past rearing its head. He stopped instantly. He raised his head, his dark eyes searching hers in the moonlight. "He did this," he stated. It wasn't a question. She nodded, her throat tight. He lowered his head, and he kissed it. His lips, warm and soft, pressed against the raised line of damaged skin. He wasn't trying to arouse her. He was honoring her. He was accepting the part of her that was broken. He kissed the scar, and then the skin beside it, and then her ribs, his mouth treating her body with a reverence that made her want to weep. This was not a man taking... This was a man claiming. The act shattered her last defense, the fear of intimacy, the trauma of her past. It all dissolved under the profound, aching tenderness of that single gesture. "Don't stop," she whispered. His mouth moved from her scar, up her stomach, over her collarbone. His hands tangled with hers, pinning them gently above her head. Their bodies moved together, a slow, desperate tangle of limbs and sheets, driven by weeks of shared fear and unspoken need. It was a collision, a claiming, a finding of solace in the eye of the storm. After, they lay spent, their limbs tangled, the moon painting their skin in shades of silver. Isabel was curled into his side, her head on his chest. His heart beat a slow, steady rhythm under her ear. She felt quiet. The buzzing anxiety that had lived under her skin for a year was gone. The shadows in the corner of the room were just shadows. "I feel safe with you," she whispered, the confession shocking her with its truth. His arm tightened around her, pulling her so close she could barely breathe. He kissed the top of her head. His voice was a low, rough vow. "Then stay," he said, "forever." The next morning, Luca used her, not her body, but her mind, her memory. He sat her down with his head of security. "Tell him," Luca ordered, "everything you saw in the alley, the lean one, Marco Trevino." She closed her eyes. She described him, his height, his restless eyes, the mole on his left cheek, the way he smiled before he used the wire. The security chief looked at Luca. "It's him. No question, he's the Varelli family's top earner and their top sadist." He gave the order. "Good," Luca said. "Now we have a face and a name tied to the act. We're not just at war, we're on a hunt." He gave Isabel a new identity, not Sarah. This one was Elena Costa, a stack of documents, a new phone, a credit card with a 5-figure limit. "You're not hiding anymore," he told her, handing her the fake driver's license. "You're with me. You're untouchable. I want them to see you're untouchable." He also brought in a stylist, Isabel's Mousy. Forgettable brown hair was cut and dyed a deep, rich auburn, styled in soft waves that framed her face. They gave her makeup, taught her how to stand, how to walk. The woman in the mirror was not Isabel. She was not Sarah. She was a stranger, beautiful and dangerous. She was his. "Marco Trevino is arrogant," Luca explained one night, standing in front of his closet, selecting a tuxedo. "He's a rabid dog, but he's a vain one. He won't be able to stand that his only witness is alive. Well, and on my arm." "What are you planning?" she asked, her stomach twisting. "He's been trying to get at you. We're going to make it easy for him." He turned, holding a black bow tie. "The annual police and politicians gala is in 3 days. The entire city will be there. The press, the old money, and every major family. including the Varellis. You're taking me there, she said, her blood running cold. You're painting a target on my back. I'm painting a target on us, he corrected. He stepped toward her, his eyes intense. He won't be able to resist. He'll try something public, sloppy, and my men will be waiting. He was using her as bait, again. But this time, he was strapping himself to the hook right beside her. The night of the gala. She stood in the bedroom while he fastened a diamond necklace around her throat. Her dress was blood red, silk, and cut low, leaving her scars and her new confidence on display. They will all be looking at you, he murmured, his fingers brushing her collarbone. Let them, she replied, her voice steady. They entered the grand ballroom, and the city's elite fell silent. The whispers followed them like a wave. Luca Moretti, the most ruthless boss in the city, had a new woman, and she was spectacular. Isabel kept her head high, her hand on his arm. She saw the flashes of cameras. She saw the jealous looks from other women, the sizing, assessing gazes from other men. She felt Luca's presence beside her, a shield of pure, deadly confidence. They were getting champagne when it happened. Isabel saw the red light first, a tiny, perfect circle, flickering on the white linen of Luca's shirt, right over his heart. She didn't think. She reacted. "Luca!" she screamed, shoving him hard. The sound of the high-velocity rifle shot and the sound of the grand ballroom window exploding inward happened at the same time. Chaos. People screamed. Crystal glasses shattered. The orchestra stopped. Luca didn't fall. He recovered his balance in a split second, his instincts faster than hers, as a second shot cracked through the air. He grabbed her, spinning them both around. He threw himself over her, using his own body as a shield, tackling her to the ground behind a marble pillar. Glass and debris rained down on them. "Are you hit?" he roared in her ear, his body a dead weight, pinning her, protecting her. No, are you—" She heard his men shouting, saw Nico and two others create a perimeter, their guns drawn, ushering panicked civilians out. "I'm fine." Luca grunted. He pushed himself up, pulling her with him, keeping her plastered against the marble, shielded from the broken window. "We're leaving, now." It was only then, in the flashing emergency lights, that she saw it. He was fine. But his left sleeve, the white cuff of his shirt, was soaked in red. A bullet had grazed him. The shot that would have hit his heart had instead torn through the flesh of his upper arm. He was bleeding. For her. The tears came. Hot and immediate. It was the first time she had cried in front of him since the night of the storm. These were not tears of fear. They were tears of pure, terrified rage. "You're hit," she choked out, her hands flying to his arm, pressing against the wound. He winced, his face tight, but his eyes were alive. They were burning with adrenaline and something else. Pride. He ignored his bleeding arm. He ignored the sirens outside. He ignored Nico shouting for them to move. He cupped her jaw, his palm rough against her skin, forcing her to look at him. His black suit was dusted with glass and plaster. His arm was dripping blood onto the floor, and he was smiling. A cold, deadly, terrifying smile. "I told you," he said, his voice a low, vicious promise. "Let them come." They didn't get far. Nico and his team had swarmed the sniper's nest in the building across the street before the police sirens had even registered. They didn't find the sniper, but they found his spotter, a low-level Varelli soldier, trying to blend with the panicked gala evacuees. They found him because he was the only one running toward the chaos. Back in the penthouse, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic. A doctor, a quiet man with unsteady hands who worked exclusively for Luca, was putting the last stitches in Luca's upper arm. Isabel stood by the window, her back to the room, her red dress now stained with a streak of Luca's blood. She hadn't said a word since they'd left the ballroom. Luca dismissed the doctor with a nod. He stood, testing the tightness of the bandage, his face grim. Nico stepped forward. "He's in the sub-level. He's talkative." "He's scared," Luca corrected. "Go." The interrogation was not an interrogation. It was a dissection. Luca sat on a steel chair in a cold concrete room beneath the club, his injured arm resting on his knee. Isabel had refused to stay upstairs. She stood in the shadow of the doorway, watching. The spotter was tied to a chair. He was weeping. He was supposed to miss, the man babbled, his eyes wide with terror. I swear to God, boss. Marco said... He said the first shot was just to scatter the guards. He said to graze you, make it look good. He wasn't supposed to hit you. Luca was perfectly still. And the second shot? It wasn't for you, the man cried. It was for her. It was a tranquilizer dart. He wanted her alive. He wanted her brought to him. He said he was going to send a message. Kill her publicly. Make you watch. Isabel's blood ran cold. He hadn't just been trying to kill her. He was planning to make her a spectacle. Luca looked at the man for a long, silent minute. The only sound was the spotter's ragged breathing. You know what Marco does to people, don't you? Luca's voice was conversational. Yeah, everyone knows. Good, Luca said. He stood up. Nico, take him to the roof. Give him a choice. He can wait for Marco to find out he failed, or he can jump. His call. Luca walked out of the room, grabbing Isabel's elbow as he passed. He didn't look at her, just pulled her with him into the private elevator. You shouldn't have seen that, he said, his voice a low growl. I needed to, she replied, her own voice hollow. I needed to know. Now you do. The penthouse became a fortress. Luca doubled the security. Men with earpieces and bulges under their jackets stood in the lobby, in the elevator. On the roof, the glass of the penthouse, already reinforced, was treated with an extra layer of blast film. War had been declared. Now, it was a siege. Luca was a caged panther, all coiled tension and lethal energy. He was on the phone constantly, his voice a blade, ordering his men, shifting assets, preparing for a full-scale assault. One evening, he found her staring out the window, watching the city lights. I'm moving you, he said. Tomorrow. A private island I own. You'll be safe. They'll never find you. Isabel turned. The woman who had fled the Mariner Hotel would have wept with gratitude. The woman who had been shot at in a red dress just looked at him. No, she said. His head snapped up. That wasn't a request. I don't care. I'm not running. I ran from the alley. I tried to run from you. I am done running. She walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. You said it yourself. My problem is your problem. Well, your war is my war. I'm not hiding on an island while you fight it. I stay. Here. With you. He stared at her. A strange, unreadable emotion in his eyes. He saw the steel in her spine, the steel he had helped forge. They will come here, Isabel. He warned. I know, she said. You told them to. I'm staying. He didn't argue again. The confinement was suffocating. After 3 days of pacing the penthouse, she couldn't take it. I need to do something, she told him. I can't just sit here and wait to be attacked. You're not trained. I'm not talking about fighting, she snapped. I'm talking about living. I'm going insane. You have businesses, legitimate ones. Put me to work. He studied her. She was right. She needed purpose. My import-export company. The main office is in this building. 10 floors down, secure, you're good with numbers. It wasn't a question. He had run a full background check on her. He knew about the accounting degree she'd never gotten to use. The next day, she went to work. She was given a small, glass-walled office. At first, the staff, tough men and women who knew who Luca Moretti was, treated her with a wary, fearful deference. She was the boss's woman, a porcelain doll to be handled with care. She ignored them. She put her head down and tore into the logistics manifests. She found a discrepancy in a shipping route in less than an hour, a 1% overspend that was costing them 6 figures a quarter. She found an error in their tariff calculations. By the end of the week, she wasn't just working, she was streamlining. Nico, who often stood guard near the office, watched her through the glass. He saw her arguing with a shipping manager twice her age, pointing at a spreadsheet, her voice firm, refusing to back down. The manager, after sputtering, had looked at his numbers and conceded. He reported back to Luca. She's not soft, boss. I know. Luca said, respect wasn't given. It was earned. Isabel earned it. The men stopped seeing her as a protected liability and started seeing her as part of the command structure. She was sharp. She was loyal. She was theirs. The war, however, was not going well. Marco Trevino was a new breed of monster. He didn't follow the old rules. He didn't just hit territories. He hit landmarks. He burned down the Sicilian, the small, quiet bar Luca's father had opened 40 years ago. It was the first place Luca had ever poured a drink. It was a message. Nothing is sacred. When Luca got the news, he didn't speak. He just went to his office and closed the door. Isabel waited. He emerged 3 hours later, and he was a different man. The controlled, coiled anger was gone. In its place was a cold, empty void. He became more brutal. His men hit 2 Varelli warehouses, and they didn't just burn them. They waited. They were ambushes. Men died, a lot of men. The city held its breath. The police were looking the other way, terrified of both sides. Luca was becoming a ghost, consumed by the violence. He stopped sleeping. He just sat in his chair, staring at the city, plotting. Isabel was his only anchor. She was the only person who could walk into his office without knocking. She would bring him food, and he would eat it. She would put her hand on his shoulder, and the tension would drain from him. If only for a second. You're going to win, she told him one night, standing behind his chair. It doesn't feel like winning, he rasped, his eyes on the skyline. In a moment of private, suffocating fear, she finally asked the question that haunted her. What happens if you're wrong? What happens if he's smarter or stronger? What happens if we lose? He was silent for a long time. He reached back, his hand finding hers, his grip crushing. He turned his head, his profile a hard line in the darkness. Then we die together, he answered, his voice absolute. But not today. The words, which should have terrified her, settled her. It was a vow. There was no running. There was no escape. There was only together. Until the end. That night, the shared danger, the promise of a shared fate, changed the air between them. He came to bed, exhausted, but his mind was still racing, his body thrumming with adrenaline. Isabel watched him. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, his jaw tight. She was tired of him being strong. She was tired of being the one who was anchored. She moved. She rose up on one elbow, her auburn hair falling over her shoulder, and kissed him. It was a soft, slow kiss. He responded, his mouth hard, trying to take control. She pulled back. No, she whispered. Tonight, you don't get to be in charge. She straddled his hips, her body settling over his. His eyes widened, surprised. His hands came up to grip her waist, his instinct to pull her down, to possess. She caught his wrists, gently, but with a strength that surprised them both. She pinned his hands to the bed, on either side of his head. Just be here, she murmured. Let me. He stared up at her, his breathing hitching. He was trapped, he was vulnerable, and he let her. He relaxed his hands under hers, uncurling his fingers. He gave her control. She lowered her head and kissed him again. And this time, it was different. It was hotter, deeper. It was not a collision, it was a claiming. She moved with a slow, deliberate confidence, her body learning his, her hips rocking against him in a perfect, unspoken rhythm. It was a dance of power, but not of dominance. She was showing him the strength he had given her. Her hands left his wrists, trailing fire down his chest, his stomach. He arched up, his hands now fisting in the sheets. Their bodies moved in perfect sync, a silent, desperate language. It was hotter than their first encounter, deeper because it wasn't about finding solace. It was about sharing strength. It was about 2 equals meeting in the fire, not as refugees but as soldiers. Later, as she lay curled against his side, his breathing finally deep and even in true sleep. She knew she had given him what he needed, a moment of surrender. The next day, the war brought a new, personal kind of hell. Luca was in his office when Nico brought him a file. Isabel was at her desk in the adjoining room, reviewing cargo manifests. She could hear their low, tense voices. "We found the leak," Nico said. "Trevino knew about the gala. He knew about the decoy car. He knew your patterns." "Who?" Luca's voice was death, A man named David Miller. He's a low-level gambler, owes money all over town. He's been feeding information to a Varelli subcapo. Isabel froze. David Miller. Her ex. The man who had sold her for $5,000. He knew her, Nico said, his voice hesitant. He's the one who sold her out the first time. Looks like he's been tracking her, selling what little he knew. He's the one who told them about the Mariner Hotel. Isabel stood, her legs trembling, and walked to the doorway. Luca was standing, his back to her, but she could see the murderous tension in his shoulders. He turned, his face a black mask of rage. He saw her, and the rage didn't lessen. It focused. "He's working with Marco," she whispered. "Yes," Luca said. "My men have him. He's downstairs." The implication was clear. Downstairs, in the concrete room. "He is yours." "Isabel," Luca said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You have the right. You choose what happens to him. I will have it carried out before sunrise." She looked at him. He was offering her vengeance, an execution, a clean, simple end to the man who had broken her life. She thought of the alley. She thought of the fear. She thought of the long nights running. "No," she said. Luca frowned. "No, I don't want him dead." She took a deep breath, the steel solidifying in her spine. "I want to see him." He brought David to one of the empty, secure apartments 2 floors down. He was not tied to a chair. He was just there, standing in the middle of a living room, flanked by 2 guards. He looked smaller than she remembered, weaker. Luca stood with her at the door. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She looked at the guards. "I want to talk to him. Alone." "Isabel?" "Alone," she insisted. "Or not at all." Luca nodded. He spoke to the guards. They left, closing the door. Luca remained outside. David stared at her. The cheap bravado he'd always had was gone. His face was pale, bruised. "Isabel," he breathed. He looked at her, the new hair, the expensive clothes, the terrifying confidence. "My God, what has he done to you? What have you done?" "David?" she asked, her voice calm. I was trying to help you," he cried, taking a step. "I knew they'd find you. I took the money. I was going to use it to get you out of the country. He twisted it. He threatened me. The old, familiar lies, the manipulation, the gaslighting that had worked on her for 2 years. She listened. She just let him talk. Let him spin his web of pathetic excuses. He tried to cry. He told her he still loved her. He said they could run, together, that Luca was a monster. She waited until he was finished, his fake sobs quieting down. She walked up to him. He looked at her. Hope in his watery eyes. Isabel slapped him. It was not a frantic, emotional blow. It was a solid, open-palmed strike that cracked across the room. His head snapped to the side. He looked back at her, stunned, his cheek blazing red. "You were worth 5,000, she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a death sentence. "I'm worth a city. You made your choice. Now I've made mine." She turned, her back straight, and walked to the door. She did not look back. There were no tears. There was nothing, just empty space where he used to be. She opened the door. Luca was standing right there. He had clearly been listening, or watching. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were full of a fierce, burning pride. She walked past him, down the hall, toward the elevator. He fell into step beside her. They rode up to the penthouse in silence. As the doors opened, he put his hand on the steel, stopping her from exiting. She looked at him. "You don't need me," he said, his voice rough. "You don't need me to protect you. Not anymore." "No," she agreed. "I don't." He smiled, a true, small smile that transformed his face. "But I'm still not letting you go." The moment hung between them, a new promise. The war was still raging, but in that second, they had won. The penthouse phone rang, a shrill, ugly sound. Luca's smile vanished. He strode to the desk and picked it up. "What?" He listened. Isabel watched his body go rigid, his knuckles turning white on the receiver. "How many?" he asked. A pause. "Lock it down," he commanded. "All of it, now." He hung up the phone. He turned to Isabel, his eyes black, lethal, and more alive than she had ever seen them. "That was Nico," he said. "Marco's done waiting. He's on his way. He's coming here, with a full kill team." The penthouse, once a symbol of untouchable height and cold luxury, had become a bunker. The floor-to-ceiling windows, which had offered a god's-eye view of the city, were now dark, reinforced with heavy steel plates from the inside. The apartment was crowded, not with party guests, but with Luca's soldiers, 10 of his best men, dressed in black tactical gear, moved with a quiet, lethal purpose, checking weapons, securing entry points, and transforming the white marble floors into a fortress. The air was thick with the smell of gun oil and ozone from the storm breaking outside. Luca was in the center of the living room, a living map of the battle plan spread across his glass coffee table. He was no longer the businessman in the tailored suit. He wore black pants and a dark, fitted shirt, his injured arm moving stiffly but with purpose. He was a general in his own home. Isabel was making coffee, her hands moving with a steady, automatic rhythm. It was the only normal thing she could think to do. She brought a cup to him. He didn't look up from the plans. "Thank you." He took a sip, then set it down. He looked at her, his eyes assessing. He saw her fear, but he also saw the steel underneath it. He walked to a steel case on the bar and opened it. Inside, nestled in foam, was a small, black semi-automatic pistol. It was compact, elegant and deadly. He picked it up and walked back to her. "I don't know how," she started. "You won't have to," he said, his voice low and serious. He turned her around, so her back was to his chest, and placed the gun in her right hand. He wrapped his own hand over hers, his fingers showing her the correct grip. His other arm came around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He was a shield, even now. "The safety is here," he murmured, his thumb brushing hers. "You flick it down, you point, you pull the trigger. It will be loud, it will kick. Do not be afraid of it." He let go, but kept her pressed against him. He was close enough that his lips brushed her ear. "This is for one reason," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper that cut through her fear. "If one of them gets past my men, if they get to you, only if you have to." He placed a spare magazine in the pocket of her jeans. The weight of it was terrifying. "You will stay in the master bedroom. It's the most secure. Nico will be at the door. You will not come out, for any reason. Do you understand me?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He turned her in his arms and kissed her. Once. Hard. It wasn't passionate. It was a brand. A promise. "Go." She went. The night dragged on. The tension was a living thing, a tightening wire. Outside, the rain lashed against the boarded-up windows, a furious, drumming counterpoint to the silence inside. Every creak of the building, every distant siren made her jump. She sat in the dark of the bedroom, the small, cold pistol on her lap. She had never felt more alone. The war began at 3:15 in the morning. It didn't start with a knock. It started with an explosion that shook the entire building. The charges were detonated simultaneously at the two main entry points, the private elevator lobby and the service stairs. The thud was so deep. She felt it in her teeth. Immediately, the penthouse erupted. The sound of automatic gunfire was deafening, a percussive, ripping sound that was nothing like the single shot at the gala. It was a roar. Men were shouting. Alarms blared. Isabel scrambled, her promise to Luca forgotten. She dove into the massive walk-in closet, the same one where he had found her during the storm. She huddled behind a rack of his suits, her hands over her ears, the pistol clutched to her chest. She was shaking so violently she was afraid her teeth would break. She was Sarah again, the terrified maid in the alley, useless. She heard a man scream, a high, sharp sound of agony, cut short. She heard another sound, a groan, close. It was just outside the bedroom door. She peeked through the slats of the closet door. Nico, who'd been guarding her, was slumped against the wall. His leg was... It was a ruin. Blood poured from a wound in his thigh. He was fumbling with a radio, his face pale and slick with sweat. Another of Luca's men lay face down in the hallway, unmoving, The gunfire was moving, closer. They had breached the living room. Nico saw her. "Get back!" he hissed, his voice strained. "Get back!" He tried to raise his rifle, but his hands were shaking. He was going into shock. Isabel looked at him. She looked at the blood. She looked at the pistol in her hand. "Only if you have to." She thought of the man in the alley. She thought of David's pathetic face. She thought of Luca, bleeding for her at the gala. She wasn't Sarah. She ran from the closet. She slid on the marble floor. Ripping a pillowcase off the bed, she crammed it against Nico's leg, pushing with all her weight. "What are you... get..." he gasped. "Shut up, B," she commanded, her voice high but steady. She ripped at Luca's expensive sheets, creating a makeshift tourniquet, her hands covered in Nico's blood. "They're coming," he whispered, his eyes fluttering. The gunfire stopped. The silence was worse. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, and then footsteps. Slow, confident footsteps coming down the hall. Nico tried to lift his gun. He couldn't. Isabel stood up. She moved in front of him, her body shielding his. A man appeared in the bedroom doorway. He wasn't one of Luca's. He was tall, dressed in black. His face obscured by a gas mask, he held a submachine gun. He scanned the room, saw Nico on the ground, and then saw her. He froze. He seemed almost surprised. He probably expected a cowering victim. He raised his gun. Isabel stared at him. She saw the lean man from the alley. She saw the sniper's red light. She saw every shadow that had haunted her for the last year. She froze, her body locked. Her mind screamed, "Run! Hide! Die!" The man took a step. "I am done running." She raised the pistol with both hands, just as Luca had shown her. It was so heavy. Her arms shook. The man laughed, a muffled, distorted sound from behind the mask. He was taking his time. She pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The kickback slammed her shoulder, knocking her back a step. The flash was blinding. The man in the doorway looked down at his chest, where a new, dark hole had appeared. He looked back up at her, his eyes wide with shock. He dropped. Isabel stared at the body, at the smoking hole. She stared at the gun in her hand. She had done it. She had killed him. She started to shake, a deep, uncontrollable ache that started in her knees and rattled her bones. The gun fell from her numb fingers, clattering to the marble. "Isabel!" Luca's voice. He burst into the room, his own pistol raised, his face a mask of primal fury. He saw the dead man in the doorway. He saw Nico, bleeding but conscious, and he saw her, standing over the gun, vibrating. He kicked the dead man's weapon away and was across the room in 2 strides. He didn't ask what happened. He just wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into his chest, his hand gripping the back of her head. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You're okay," he growled into her hair. "You're safe. I've got you." She buried her face in his shirt, inhaling his scent of smoke and cypress and power. He let her shake for 3 seconds, then he held her at arm's length. "Are you hurt?" No, but Nico, and you." She looked down. A dark, wet stain was spreading across his side, just above his hip. It wasn't Nico's blood. It was his. "You're bleeding," she whispered. He glanced down, as if just noticing. "It's nothing. It's not nothing," she screamed. She shoved him hard toward the bed. "Sit down now." Her panic transformed, laser-focused. She grabbed a pile of clean towels from the bathroom. She ripped his shirt open. It was a deep graze, but it was bleeding heavily. She pressed the towels to the wound, hard. He hissed. A sharp intake of breath. Tears, hot and angry, streamed down her face, mixing with the blood on her hands. "You promised," she choked out, her voice cracking. "You promised we'd die together. You are not allowed to die on me. Luca Moretti, you are not allowed to leave me." He stared at her, his dark eyes wide with a raw, stunned emotion. He had seen fear and loyalty and passion. He had never seen this pure, possessive rage. The door exploded, not the bedroom door, but the main door to the panic room, which was hidden behind a false wall in the closet. "Boss," a new voice, one of his men. "Marco's here. He's in the living room. We're pinned down." Luca grabbed her hand. "We have to move." He pulled her up. He stumbled, the blood loss making him dizzy. Isabel threw his good arm over her shoulder, taking his weight. She grabbed the pistol from the floor and shoved it into his hand. They half ran, half fell into the walk-in closet. Luca hit a button hidden behind a tie rack. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a thick steel door. They tumbled inside, into a small, dark box made of concrete and steel. Luca slammed his palm on the red close button. The door hissed shut, the locking bolts thudding into place like the world ending. The sound of gunfire, the alarms, the screaming, it was all gone, muffled to a dull, distant thumping. It was just them. The small room was lit by a single, dim emergency light. The air was close, smelling of dust and steel and Luca's blood. He slid down the wall, leaving a red smear, and sat hard on the floor. His breathing was shallow, ragged. Isabel dropped to her knees in front of him, pressing the bloody towels back to his side. Her own breathing was a series of panicked gasps. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice weak. "It's okay." "It's not okay!" He reached up, his hand shaking, and cradled her face. His palm was rough, covered in grime. He looked at her, his eyes losing their focus, dark with pain and an animal fear she had never seen in him. This was it. This was the end. Isabel. He breathed. He pulled her to him. He kissed her. It was not the slow burn of the closet or the passionate claiming in his bed. This was desperate. It was shaky. It tasted of blood and gunpowder and the metallic tang of pure terror. His lips were chapped, his grip weak but frantic. It was a kiss that said, "I'm sorry. I love you. Goodbye." It was the kiss of their last moment on earth. She kissed him back, tears streaming down her face, her fingers gripping his shirt, trying to hold him to her. To life. A loud crack came from a speaker on the wall. "Boss?" It was Nico's voice, strained but alive. "Boss, can you hear me?" Luca broke the kiss, his head slumping back. He hit the talk button. "Here, we got him. We got the bastard. Marco. He's alive. The attack's over. They're surrendering." The silence that followed was absolute. Isabel and Luca just stared at each other. The tide had turned. They hadn't just repelled the attack. They had captured the king. When Luca emerged from the panic room, leaning heavily on Isabel, his living room was a war zone. His men, bloody but standing, had a dozen Varelli soldiers on their knees, and in the center of the room, held by two of Luca's biggest men, was Marco Trevino. He was bruised, his arm at a broken angle, but his restless, sadistic eyes were still full of hate. He saw Isabel. He saw Luca, bleeding. He spat. "You're dead, Moretti. Both of you." Luca walked toward him. He pulled the small pistol from his waistband, Isabel's gun. He pressed it to Marco's forehead. Isabel watched. This was it, the justice of the alley. Luca's finger tightened on the trigger. Marco closed his eyes. Luca looked at Isabel. He saw her face, pale but steady. She was not the woman from the alley. She was not hiding. She watched him, trusting him. He lowered the gun. He pulled out his phone, his thumb bloody. He dialed a number. "I have him. Yes, the one you want, Marco Trevino. He's yours, in exchange for the usual, and for a full, RICO-level sweep of every Varelli associate. I want them gone by sunrise. You'll get your headlines. Just send the car." He hung up. He looked at Marco, whose face was a mask of confusion, then pure terror, death. He understood. The FBI, he feared. "You don't get to die fast," Luca whispered. "You get to rot." The next day, the city was different. The penthouse was being repaired. The news was on every channel. Federal agents, acting on a high-level anonymous tip, had dismantled the entire Varelli syndicate, mass arrests, seized assets. It was a decapitation. Isabel stood on the balcony. The boards were gone. The glass was new. The city stretched out below, clean in the morning light. Luca joined her, his arm in a fresh sling, a cup of coffee in his good hand. They stood in silence, watching the street below. A line of black federal cars pulled up to the main entrance of the building. Two agents brought Marco Trevino out. He was in an orange jumpsuit, his hands and feet in chains. He looked broken. As they pushed him toward the car, he looked up. He saw them, standing on the balcony, untouchable. He screamed, a high, thin sound of pure, impotent rage. The agents shoved him into the car. The doors slammed. The motorcade pulled away. It went quiet. Isabel leaned her head against Luca's good shoulder. "You dared them," she whispered, watching the last car turn the corner. "And you won." 6 weeks. That was how long it took to reclaim the penthouse. The steel plates came off the windows. The carpets, stained with blood and chemicals, were ripped out and replaced. The marble in the hallway outside the bedroom, cracked where the man Isabel had shot had fallen, was torn up and relaid as if it had never happened. The city, too, had stabilized. With the Varelli syndicate gone, Luca's organization absorbed their territory, their routes and their assets. The war was over. The victory was absolute. Luca's arm healed. The deep graze on his side became a puckered, angry scar. He worked, but the work was different now. It was no longer the frantic, adrenaline-fueled planning of a general. It was the slow, methodical paperwork of a king securing his borders. Isabel stayed. She was no longer a guest, a witness, or a refugee. She was a fixture. She had her own desk in his office. She signed payroll. She vetted his legitimate investments. She had a voice. And his men, who had once seen her as a liability, now treated her with a deep, abiding respect. She was the woman who had helped Nico. She was the woman who had faced a killer. She was theirs. They had carved out peace, but the peace was quiet, heavy. It had been bought with blood. Isabel felt that cost one cool Tuesday, a month after the attack. She took one of the less conspicuous cars from the garage and drove, alone, to the cemetery in the quiet part of the city. She found the grave easily. It was new, the earth still dark and piled high. Matteo Bianchi, beloved son and brother. He'd been 22. He was the man she had seen face down in the hallway. She stood there for a long time, the wind pulling at her auburn hair. She hadn't known him. She had never spoken to him. But he had died defending the door to the room where she was hiding. She placed a single white rose on the fresh dirt. Her trauma had not vanished. It was not a switch that could be flipped. She still woke, sometimes, her heart hammering. The sound of the gunshot she had fired echoing in the dark. The image of the man in the mask, his moment of stunned surprise, was burned into her memory. She had taken a life, but she no longer hid in the closet. When she woke from the nightmares, she would find Luca's hand in the dark, and he would simply grip it, his strength flowing into hers, anchoring her to the present. She wasn't Sarah. She wasn't the ghost from the Mariner Hotel. She was Isabel. She walked with her head high. Her trauma was a part of her, a scar, just like the ones on her ribs. It was no longer a cage. She turned from the grave and walked back to the car, her shoulders straight, her gaze steady. The world, which had tried to silence her, had returned to its own narrative. One morning, Isabel was scrolling through a news feed on a tablet, a cup of coffee in her hand. Luca was at the breakfast bar, reviewing shipping manifests. She stopped. A local, high-profile journalist had published a long-form piece in a city magazine. The headline was dramatic. "The Lion and the Witness," she read aloud. "How a gritty mafia war was silenced. By honor." Luca grunted, not looking up. "It says here," she continued, a smile playing on her lips, "that sources close to the Moretti organization claim the entire war began because you refused to surrender an innocent woman, a witness, to the Varelli syndicate." "Sources," Luca scoffed. "Nico talks too much. It says you're a new kind of boss, a principled protector who, and I quote, dared the entire underworld to come, all to save the one woman he loved. It paints you as a hero." Luca finally looked up from his papers. He had a look of profound disbelief on his face. He took the tablet from her. He read the line. He laughed. It was not a cynical scoff. It was a deep, genuine laugh that startled her. It transformed his harsh features, erasing the lines of stress and violence. "A hero," he said, handing the tablet back, still shaking his head. "They'll write anything. People need a story. They prefer it to the truth." "And what's the truth?" she asked, leaning against the counter. His smile faded, replaced by that familiar, quiet intensity. The truth is, I didn't care about honor. I just didn't want them to have what was mine. That night, she found him on the balcony. The new glass was clean, reflecting the endless sea of city lights. He had been standing out here for an hour, unmoving, just staring at the empire he now completely controlled. He wore a dark shirt, his sleeves rolled up, the scar on his forearm stark in the blue light. She came up behind him, wrapping a soft cashmere blanket around his shoulders, then curling into his side, inside its warmth. He put his good arm around her, pulling her close. "You're quiet," she murmured, resting her head on his chest. "Just thinking." His voice was a low rumble. About the journalist? About being a hero? No, about vineyards. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. "Vineyards? Upstate," he said, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "A few 100 acres. They grow grapes. It's quiet. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away." Her stomach tightened. She didn't understand. I've never known you to be interested in wine." He was silent for a long moment. Then he turned, his body facing hers, his hands finding her waist. "I'm done. Isabel." "Done with what? The cleanup?" Nico said. "No, done with this." He gestured, his hand sweeping across the glittering skyline, the city, the power, the noise. Done with the penthouse, the bodyguards, the war. Isabel's heart stalled. This was his life. This was him, the club, the companies, the network of fear and respect he had cultivated. But you won. This is all yours. You fought for it. You built this entire empire to protect yourself, to protect me. "I did," he said, his voice rough. He brought his hands up to frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. His eyes were dark, serious, and stripped of all pretense. "I didn't fight for this. I fought for you. This." He glanced at the city with a sudden, weary distaste. Was just the armor. It was the fortress. The war is over. I don't need it anymore. She was torn. But Luca, to just leave it? "I would give all of this up tomorrow," he whispered, his voice cracking with a raw sincerity she had never heard. "I'd burn it to the ground if it means waking up beside you, in a place where the windows don't need to be bulletproof. I don't want to be a king. Isabel, I just want to be your husband." The last word hung in the air, a vow more binding than any kiss. She looked at him, the man who had invited war, the man who had bled for her, the man who was now offering her the one thing she'd never had, an ordinary life. She didn't speak. She just rose on her toes and kissed him. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He carried her inside, away from the balcony, away from the city he no longer wanted. He laid her on the bed. The bedroom was dark, lit only by the distant city glow. This time, there was no gunfire, no tension, no fear. He didn't take her with the desperate hunger of their past encounters. He moved with a slow, aching gentleness. He undressed her, not with impatience, but with a reverence that made her skin tingle. His calloused fingers, the hands of a killer and a king, were impossibly soft. He worshipped her. He made love to her with his eyes open, his gaze locked on hers. It was a silent conversation. His hands memorized her, from her hair to her shoulders to the old, faded scar on her ribs. He kissed it, not with the pained reverence of before, but with a quiet familiarity. It was just a part of her. She met his tenderness with her own. Her hands didn't grip his hair. They traced the new scar on his side, the healed bullet wound on his arm. She felt his heartbeat, steady and strong beneath her palm. There were whispered promises, lost in the dark, a vow to stay, a promise of forever. It was a slow, profound joining, a physical sealing of the promise he had just made. It was not the collision of two broken people. It was the quiet, deliberate union of two souls who had fought their way to whole. It was, Isabel thought, as she drifted to sleep in his arms, the first truly safe night of her life. 2 months later, Isabel sat in a beige waiting room, her foot tapping nervously on the carpet. The room smelled of stale coffee and magazines. A small plaque on the wall read, "Doctor, Amanda Evans." trauma and recovery specialist. The door to the inner office opened. "Isabel Costa?" the doctor asked, smiling warmly. Isabel stood. She took a deep breath. She glanced back. Luca was sitting in the corner, trying to fold his large frame into a chair built for someone half his size. He was reading a 3-month-old fishing magazine. He looked profoundly out of place in his $1,000 suit, a shark in a suburban fish pond. He looked up. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just met her gaze and nodded. Once. A quiet, solid, steadying presence. "I am here. Go." Isabel turned and walked into the doctor's office. The final scene was not a penthouse. It was not a vineyard. It was a small house on the coast, 2 states away. The white paint was peeling, and the front porch was slightly warped by the salt air. The sound of the ocean, a low, constant shush, was the only noise. A simple, unassuming car pulled into the gravel driveway. Luca got out. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in faded jeans and a dark Henley, his sleeves pushed up to his elbows. He looked younger, lighter. He unlocked the front door and pushed it open. He turned, leaning against the door frame, and smiled. Isabel got out of the passenger side. She was barefoot, wearing a simple sundress, her auburn hair tied back in a messy knot. She was laughing, the sound bright and easy, carried away by the ocean breeze. There were no guards, no guns, no reinforced windows, just them. She ran up the steps, her bare feet sandy. He caught her hand. "Welcome home," he said. She leaned up, kissed him, and walked inside. As she crossed the threshold of their small, quiet, perfectly safe home, she paused, looking at the man who had dared an entire city to come for her. "They told me to run. I did, straight into him. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed it. We love hearing from you. So please drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you're listening from. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more content just like this. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Isabel and Luca's journey, so please share your feelings in English in the comments. We read every single one.